Step away from my wife!
The badge caught the sunlight first. It was a small thing, really. A single motion. A man in a faded college t-shirt and gym shorts reaching down and lifting the hem of his shirt just enough, just barely enough to let the afternoon sun find what was pinned underneath. Gold. Heavy. The kind of seal that didn't belong on a man standing in a gas station parking lot in gym clothes, and yet there it was, unmistakable and absolute, catching every photon of that Virginia afternoon like it had been waiting for exactly this moment. Officer Russell Cole's eyes found it at the same time everyone else did. Sandra Moore across the lot lowered her phone slightly, her thumb hovering motionless over the record button she had already been pressing for 4 minutes. Ray Dutton, 2 cars over, stopped breathing. Claire Jameson, who had been standing with her own phone raised and her attorney's instincts firing on every cylinder, felt the air leave her lungs in a slow, silent exhale. 3 children in the back of a clean silver minivan pressed their faces to the glass, and the smallest one, a 9-year-old girl in a grass-stained soccer jersey, stopped crying mid-breath. Diane Carter stood with both hands raised, palms open toward the sky, the afternoon heat rising off the asphalt through the soles of her shoes. She had been standing that way for 11 minutes. She did not lower her hands. She did not turn around. But something in her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, like a woman who has been holding a very heavy door open alone and has finally heard footsteps coming from the other side. Cole's face drained from sun-flushed red to the color of old chalk. The transformation took 3 seconds, and in those 3 seconds, 15 years of untouchable arrogance collapsed like a condemned building, falling in on itself, floor by floor, in perfect, terrible sequence. His hand, which had been reaching for the handcuffs on his belt, dropped to his side. 4 hours before that moment, Russell Cole had been sitting in his cruiser near the air pump of the Summit BP station on Midlothian Turnpike, eating a gas station sandwich and feeling like the king of a small but satisfying kingdom. He had no idea that the man he was about to dismiss as somebody's inconvenient husband was the new chief of Richmond Police Department. He had no idea that the woman he had decided to teach a lesson was recording everything on a dash cam that uploaded automatically to cloud storage. He had no idea that what he thought was a routine Saturday afternoon stop was about to pull a loose thread that would unravel 3 years of a carefully constructed, financially lucrative, and breathtakingly corrupt operation that had targeted dozens of women in 3 Richmond neighborhoods. He had no idea about any of it, and that not knowing, that absolute arrogant confidence that the world worked the way it always had, was about to become the most expensive ignorance of his life. This is the story of the afternoon a gas station parking lot became a courtroom, and the brutal, irreversible karma that followed every single person who had decided for 6 years running that 13 women were not worth listening to. You do not want to stop watching now. Saturday mornings in the Carter household operated on a logic that only Diane fully understood, which was appropriate since she was the one who had built the system from scratch over 9 years of trial error and the particular kind of exhaustion that descends on parents of small children, like weather settling in around the shoulders and refusing to lift until sometime around Thursday. She was 42 years old and worked as a senior accountant at a mid-size firm in downtown Richmond. And the thing people always said about her, the thing her colleagues mentioned in performance reviews and her friends repeated at dinner tables, was that Diane Carter had a gift for seeing patterns that other people missed. Numbers made sense to her in a way that felt almost personal, the way a musician hears a chord differently than everyone else in the room, not just hearing it, but feeling its structure, its internal logic, the places where it held, and the places where it might crack under pressure. She had spent 15 years building a professional reputation on never missing the thing hiding in plain sight. She also couldn't find Amani's shin guards on this particular Saturday morning, which she was choosing to find funny rather than infuriating because it was 11 o'clock and they had to leave in 20 minutes. The dash cam on her windshield had been there for 6 months, ever since her closest friend, a woman named Patrice, who taught second grade and drove a sensible Toyota, had been pulled over and spent 4 months fighting a speeding ticket. She didn't deserve, ultimately losing because it was her word against a uniformed officer's, and the system in that county still ran on the assumption that the officer was probably right. Patrice had paid the fine and never mentioned it again, but Diane had watched the whole thing and drawn a conclusion that she filed away the way she filed everything important, precisely in a place she wouldn't forget. Keep receipts, document everything. The camera recorded continuously and uploaded automatically. And on most Saturdays, it captured nothing more consequential than school pickup lines and the parking lot at Kroger. Imani found her shin guards behind the dryer. The world resumed. Leonard Carter did not look like the chief of police when he climbed into the minivan that morning, which was partly by design and partly just the unavoidable reality of being a husband whose wife had clearly claimed the front seat as a matter of established household law. He was 45, built like a man who had once been an athlete and had kept up enough of the habit to remain convincing, with close-cropped hair going gray at the temples and the particular kind of stillness that develops in people who spend years in rooms where everything they say will be remembered and repeated. He had been chief for 5 months. 5 months of learning which fires to fight first, which alliances were genuine, and which were the law enforcement equivalent of a handshake from someone counting your fingers, and which officers in his department had been operating for so long under the assumption that the previous administration would look the other way, that they had stopped bothering to hide what they were doing. He squeezed into the middle row between Tyler Hughes and Chloe Reed, 2 of Imani's teammates who were already engaged in an argument about defensive positioning that had apparently been ongoing since approximately Thursday. His phone buzzed as Diane pulled out of the driveway, and he looked down at the screen with the expression Diane had learned to recognize over 17 years of marriage, not alarm exactly, but the particular quality of attention a person gives to something they have been watching for a long time and have finally seen move. The subject line read, "Cole Complaint Number 13. He had been building a file on Officer Russell Cole for 4 months. Quietly, carefully, the way you build a case against someone who has been protected for so long that they have become careless about covering their tracks because careless people in Leonard's experience left the most evidence." He closed the email without responding. He would deal with it Monday. Right now, he was in gym shorts in the middle seat of a minivan, and Chloe Reed was explaining to him at considerable length why strikers who don't track back were a structural problem at every level of the game. "She's right," Leonard said, mostly to end the debate. Tyler groaned. Imani laughed. Diane smiled without turning her head. For a few minutes, everything was exactly what it appeared to be. Russell Cole had a philosophy, the kind that forms in men who have been given a small amount of real power early in life and have spent the subsequent years confusing the power with the person. Fear was respect. That was the core of it, stripped down to its studs. People who feared you respected you, and people who respected you got out of your way, and getting out of your way was the natural and correct behavior of the world as it was supposed to operate. He had been a police officer for 15 years and a bully for considerably longer, and the badge had simply given the second thing a legal framework to operate within. He walked with the deliberate space-occupying weight of a man who had never been told to move and had never felt the need to. He called his brother-in-law Greg Tasker every Tuesday and Thursday without fail, which was not remarkable in itself, except that Greg owned Summit Towing, and the calls were not about family. They were about vehicles, specifically about which vehicles Cole intended to have impounded in the coming days, and which neighborhoods were worth focusing on, and whether Greg had room in the lot. It was as natural to Cole as checking his voicemail, a piece of routine so thoroughly absorbed into the shape of his workday that he had long since stopped thinking of it as anything other than just the way things worked. He had 13 complaints in his file. He knew about 12 of them. The 13th had been filed the previous Tuesday by a woman named Rosa Garza, and he had not yet been notified, which meant he was operating on this particular Saturday afternoon with the full confidence of a man who believed himself to be perfectly safe. The Summit BP station on Midlothian Turnpike sat at a busy intersection where two different versions of Richmond came close enough to see each other without quite touching older residential streets on one side, newer commercial development on the other, the kind of corner that got repaved every few years and never quite resolved its own identity. Cole had been idling near the air pump for 20 minutes when Diane pulled in, which was not unusual. He often stopped here on weekend afternoons. The sightlines were good, the traffic was steady, and the neighborhood produced a reliable volume of what Cole, in his texts to Officer Martinez, referred to as easy stops, his term for vehicles driven by women who, in his experience, were unlikely to lawyer up on a Saturday afternoon. He watched the silver minivan park near the convenience store entrance. He noted the clean lines of the vehicle, the current registration sticker. The careful way the driver pulled into the space precise, unhurried the parking of someone with nothing to hide, which Cole had long since learned to read as its own kind of invitation. Sandra Moore was parked 2 rows over, waiting for her daughter's practice to start scrolling her phone. Ray Dutton sat in his truck near the air pump, the window down, the radio low. Claire Jameson hadn't arrived yet. Leonard Carter sat in the middle row of the silver minivan, his phone open to an unread email, watching through the gap between the front seats as Russell Cole unfolded himself from his cruiser and started walking. Cole didn't tap on the window the way most people knock on a door, the polite, apologetic kind of knock that says, "I'm sorry to bother you." He knocked the way someone knocks when they want you to understand, before you've even rolled down the glass, that the balance of power in this particular interaction has already been established and was never up for negotiation. 3 hard raps of his knuckle on the driver's side window, and then he stood there with his arms crossed and his weight settled back on his heels, giving Diane a long, unhurried look through the glass as she lowered it, taking in her face, her clothes, the interior of the vehicle, all of it cataloged with the particular efficiency of someone who has already made up his mind and is simply gathering whatever material he'll need to justify the conclusion he arrived at before he ever left his cruiser. Diane kept both hands on the steering wheel, fingers spread and visible the way she had learned to do years ago and had never had a good reason to unlearn. Her voice when she spoke was quiet and entirely steady. The voice of a woman who had decided some time before this moment that she would not give this officer or any officer who approached her this way on this kind of afternoon, for this kind of reason, the satisfaction of watching her hands shake. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there something I can help you with?" Cole leaned down to the window closer than the training protocols required, close enough that the smell of stale coffee came through the opening. He looked at her license for considerably longer than necessary, moving his gaze from the photo to her face and back again in a way that was designed to feel like an accusation without technically being one. License and registration. Of course. Diane reached for her purse with the careful, telegraphed slowness of someone who has learned that fast movements in this situation invite a different kind of conversation. She produced her license, registration, and insurance card, all of them current, all of them exactly in order, the paperwork of a woman who had never given the system a legitimate reason to look at her twice. Cole took them and held them. He let the silence sit there on the asphalt between them, heavy and deliberate. And then, "This your vehicle, Miss Carter?" "Yes, sir." "Registered to you?" "Yes, sir." "Where are you headed this afternoon?" "Soccer practice. The park about 10 minutes from here. My daughter and her teammates." Diane kept her eyes straight ahead. In the back seat, she could hear Amani shifting the quiet, worried sound of a child who has picked up on something she can't name but understands is wrong. Cole said "uh-huh" in the tone of a man who had already decided the answer didn't matter, and he walked around the vehicle slowly, one hand trailing along the body of the minivan, tapping the rear bumper with his knuckle, the way a butcher taps a cut of meat. "Registration sticker's about to expire," Cole announced, returning to her window with the flat confidence of a man presenting established fact. "It's valid through June, sir." Diane's voice remained level. "The renewal came in the mail last week. I have the receipt in my glove compartment if you'd like to see it." Cole looked at her for a moment with an expression that managed to communicate without using any words that could be recorded that her knowing the actual status of her own registration was itself somehow an inconvenience to him. "Step out of the vehicle, please." In the middle row, Leonard did not move. He had his phone out, angled through the gap between the front seats, the camera capturing Cole's face in clear afternoon light. He had recognized Cole the moment the man walked around to the driver's side window, had known the name, the complaints, the file that was sitting half-built on his desk back at headquarters, and he was now engaged in the most difficult exercise of discipline he had performed in 5 months as chief, which was staying exactly where he was and letting this play out long enough to be undeniable. "Officer, I'm not sure I understand the basis for the stop," Diane said, her hand resting still and open on the door frame. "Have I committed a traffic violation?" "I'll determine that. Step out." Diane opened the door and stepped onto the hot asphalt, and Sandra Moore across the parking lot looked up from her phone and felt something shift in the air of that ordinary Saturday afternoon, something that had no name but that she had felt before in other parking lots on other ordinary days, and she raised her phone and pressed record without quite deciding to. Ray Dutton leaned forward in his truck. He opened his window all the way. Jeans, a plain blue shirt, hair pulled back. Diane Carter, standing in a gas station parking lot, looked like exactly what she was, a mother who had stopped for snacks on the way to soccer practice in a clean vehicle with valid registration on a Saturday afternoon, having committed no violation that had been identified or named. "Hands where I can see them," Cole said. She raised them slightly, palms forward, and Cole walked a slow circle around her. Not a search, not a procedure, but a performance, the practiced display of a man accustomed to using the geometry of his own body to communicate who holds the space and who merely occupies it. "You seem nervous, Ms. Carter." "It's 90 degrees, officer." "Where were you before this?" "Home. Then I picked up my husband. Then we came here." "Your husband." Cole glanced at the minivan, at the man in gym clothes visible through the window. "Tell him to step out as well." Diane said nothing to that. She kept her hands at the level Cole had indicated, and she stood there in the heat, and she waited because she had learned a long time ago that in situations like this, waiting was its own form of resistance, patient documented and impossible to misrepresent. "Pop the trunk," Cole said. "I don't consent to a search of my vehicle." "I smell marijuana." No one else in that parking lot smelled marijuana. Not Sandra Moore, who was now 12 feet closer than she had been. Not Ray Dutton, whose truck window was fully open. Not Claire Jameson, who pulled into the lot in that moment, saw a black woman standing with her hands raised in front of a uniformed officer and put her car in park before she had finished processing what she was seeing. Cole pulled his radio from his belt. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Need backup at the BP station on Midlothian Turnpike. Uncooperative subject. Possible narcotics." In the back of the minivan, Imani began to cry. The small, helpless crying of a child who doesn't understand what's happening, but understands completely that something is wrong with the world, that the person she most depends on is in some kind of danger, and there is nothing a 9-year-old can do about it except press her face to the glass and make a sound that no parent in any parking lot anywhere should ever have to hear. Diane heard it. She absorbed it. She kept her hands exactly where they were because that was what she had decided to do, and because she was thinking in the particular clear-eyed way that people think when they are very frightened and very angry, and have chosen to be neither about 12 other women who had stood in situations something like this one and called the number and filled out the form and waited for something to happen, and for whom nothing had happened at all. She was not going to be the 13th name on a list that went nowhere. Claire Jameson was a family law attorney, which meant her expertise was in custody disputes and divorce proceedings, and the particular chaos of families falling apart, not criminal law, not civil rights litigation. But she had gone to law school, and law school had taught her certain things that did not require a specialty to apply, and the thing she was watching in this parking lot was one of them. She walked over with her phone raised and stopped 8 feet from Cole. "Officer, I'm an attorney. The driver has stated she does not consent to a search. Without probable cause, you don't have the authority to compel one. Cole turned and looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has heard this before and has decided through considerable trial and confirmation that it doesn't apply to him. "Ma'am, this doesn't involve you. Step back. I'm a citizen observing a public interaction on public property. Last warning." Claire did not step back. She stood where she was, and she kept her phone recording, and 3 feet behind her. Ray Dutton had gotten out of his truck and was standing with his own phone out, not saying anything, just present, just witnessing in the particular way that bystanders sometimes understand without being told that the most useful thing they can do is refuse to be invisible. Cole returned to Diane. His radio crackled back up was 3 minutes out. He leaned closer, dropping his voice below what the phones around him could clearly pick up, though not below what the dash cam microphone mounted on the minivan's windshield was recording in clean, unambiguous audio. "You think you're being smart?" he said. "Standing here with your hands up making a scene. I've been doing this 15 years. I know how this works." Diane looked straight ahead. "I know you do, officer." Something in that answer, the quietness of it, the absolute absence of deference, without the presence of aggression, made the color rise in Cole's face in a way that had nothing to do with the heat. "Open the trunk. Last time I asked before I call Summit Towing, and we do this at the impound." Summit Towing, his brother-in-law's company. 47 calls in 3 years. "I do not consent to a search," Diane said again in the exact same tone she had used the first time, because the answer had not changed, and she saw no reason to deliver it differently. Imani's crying had risen in pitch, not words, not a name, just the raw sound of a child's fear, and it filled the parking lot, the way sounds like that always fill spaces, cutting through everything else, landing differently in every adult who heard it, depending on what they had in their own lives been afraid of. Kevin Nash's cruiser pulled in lights, cycling. He stepped out young and uncomfortable and looked at the back of the minivan before he looked at anything else. Nash was 29 years old and had been on the force for 6 years, which was long enough to know how things worked and not quite long enough to have fully made his peace with all of it. He had worked with Cole for 3 of those 6 years. He knew the reputation, knew the pattern, knew the way. Cole's arrest numbers broke down by neighborhood. If you looked at the data carefully, and he had made the choice that most officers made in departments where the unwritten rule was that you handled your business and let other people handle theirs. He had made that choice repeatedly over 3 years, and he had not slept particularly well about it. He looked at the 3 children's faces in the back of the minivan, and then he looked at Diane standing with her hands raised in 90-degree heat, and then he looked at Cole, and he walked over to his senior officer and lowered his voice. "What's the stop for?" he asked quietly. "Probable cause. Marijuana odor." Nash didn't smell marijuana. He had been 3 feet from the open window of the minivan for 45 seconds, and he smelled soccer cleats and a spilled juice box, and the particular atmosphere of a vehicle that is regularly occupied by children. He looked at Cole. He looked at Diane. He took a step back. He did not contradict Cole out loud. That was not what he did not yet. Not in this parking lot. But he stopped moving toward Diane, stopped positioning himself in a way that communicated assistance, and he put his hand in his pocket instead of near his belt, and he stood there with the specific stillness of a man who has made a very small decision that he already knows will grow into a much larger one. Cole reached for his handcuffs. The metal caught the afternoon light. Leonard Carter's hand settled on the door handle. The door of the minivan opened without drama. No raised voice preceded it, no ultimatum, no announcement. Just the quiet mechanical sound of a door being opened by someone who had decided that the exact right moment had arrived and that waiting any longer would serve no one. A man in gym shorts and a faded university t-shirt stepped out onto the asphalt and walked forward with the measured, deliberate pace of someone who has been waiting to do this for 4 months and wants to get every step exactly right. Nash saw him first. The young officer's posture changed before anything else happened. A subtle shift weight redistributing chin coming up slightly, the involuntary physical recalibration of someone who has registered that the situation has fundamentally changed even before his conscious mind has finished identifying why. He took half a step back without deciding to. Cole was still focused on Diane, the handcuffs now open in his left hand, and he did not register the man approaching until he was close enough that looking away would have required a decision. Cole turned, assessed gym clothes, no uniform civilian, and made the quick, incorrect calculation that had been the signature move of his entire career. "Sir, get back in the vehicle." The man in gym clothes did not respond. He did not slow down. He walked 3 more steps and stopped at a distance that was precisely calculated close enough to be impossible to ignore, far enough to give every camera in that parking lot a clean, unobstructed line. Then he reached down and lifted the hem of his t-shirt. Gold, heavy. The seal of the Richmond Police Department, but not the circular shield of a patrol officer or a detective or even a captain, a design that most of the officers on the force could identify from 20 feet, because it was the design you were briefed on when you were brought into the department, the one you were shown in orientation as an example of the chain of command, the one that sat at the very top. Chief of Police. The afternoon sun found it immediately. Cole's eyes locked onto the badge with the involuntary fixation of a man whose entire nervous system has just sent an emergency signal that his brain has not yet finished processing. He looked at the seal. He looked at the man's face. He looked back at the seal. And then recognition arrived, not all at once, but in sequence, floor by floor, the way realization comes when it is large enough to require assembly upon arrival, the face from the departmental briefings, from the photographs in the hallway at headquarters, from the announcement email 5 months ago that he had read and filed under, "Probably won't affect me." Leonard Carter, the new chief, the reformer who had been requesting internal files and asking uncomfortable questions about complaint resolution rates. The man Cole had privately discussed with Officer Martinez in a text message that included the phrase, "New chief is a problem, keep our heads down." The man who had been sitting in the middle seat of his wife's minivan for the last 11 minutes, recording every word. Cole's hand opened, the handcuffs dropped back against his belt. The blood left his face in a single visible wave, draining from sun-flushed red to the color of old paper, and for the first time in 15 years of wearing a badge that he had treated as personal armor. Russell Cole stood in a public place without any protection at all. Across the lot, Sandra Moore exhaled a single syllable into the afternoon air. Ray Dutton's phone hand dropped 2 inches, then steadied. Claire Jameson lowered her phone for exactly 1 second before raising it again, because even astonishment has to eventually yield to documentation. Leonard looked at Cole the way a person looks at something they have been patient about for a very long time and have finally reached the end of their patience, for not with fury, not with satisfaction, but with the particular cold clarity of someone who has moved past the emotion entirely and arrived at the plain structural fact of the matter. He said 6 words. He said them quietly at a register that required the parking lot to be silent to hear them, and the parking lot was completely silent. "Step away from my wife." Not a threat. Not a command delivered in the hierarchical bark of a superior officer pulling rank. Just 6 words, in the tone of a man stating a fact about the world as it now existed, as clearly and finally as a door closing. Cole stepped back. Not 1 step, 2, his heels finding the asphalt with the uncertain shuffle of someone whose body has processed a verdict that his mind is still appealing. His hands came up slightly at his sides, an unconscious gesture, the physical vocabulary of a person who has run out of moves. Kevin Nash behind him turned and walked back to his cruiser and got in and sat with both hands on the steering wheel, the engine off, not leaving, not staying in any meaningful sense, just existing in the space between having done the wrong thing and not yet knowing what the right thing would cost him. Diane lowered her hands. She turned toward the minivan door, and as she reached for the handle, she heard from behind the glass the small and uncertain voice of her daughter. Not the panicked crying of the last 11 minutes, but something quieter and more searching. the voice of a child who has seen something she doesn't have words for yet. "Daddy?" Leonard did not look at the van. He kept his eyes on Cole. "My office," he said. "Bring your union representative. Bring a lawyer." He paused, and the pause carried the full weight of everything recorded, everything witnessed, everything about to happen next. "You'll need both." Cole arrived early, which he would later recognize as a mistake. Arriving early meant sitting in his truck in the department parking lot for 22 minutes, looking up at a building he had walked into for 15 years and finding that it looked different now, in the way that familiar places look different when you have done something in them that cannot be undone. Captain Frank DeLuca met him at the entrance in his dress uniform, carrying the practiced calm of a man whose entire professional identity is built on the conviction that situations like this one can be managed if you control the information and limit the exposure. DeLuca was the Union president, 53 years old, 28 years on the force, the kind of institutional survivor who had outlasted 4 chiefs and 3 corruption investigations by understanding with genuine precision exactly how much truth the system could comfortably absorb before it became a problem. "Short answers," DeLuca said quietly as they walked the hallway. "Don't volunteer anything. Don't explain. We have you." Officers passed them in the corridor. A few nodded the automatic imprecise nod that people exchange when they're not sure what expression is appropriate and need to commit to something. Most found pressing business in the direction they were already walking. The waiting area outside Leonard's office had 4 chairs and a secretary who typed with complete concentration and did not look up when they sat down. No one offered coffee. No one made the small, meaningless conversation that usually fills spaces like this one. The waiting was its own message, and the message was nothing about what comes next is going to be comfortable. The door opened. "Chief Caldwell will see you now." Leonard's office was larger than Cole had imagined it, and cleaner a desk with nothing unnecessary on it, the city's flag in one corner, framed commendations on the wall arranged with the particular precision of someone who had thought carefully about what they wanted visible and what they did not. And across from the 2 chairs that DeLuca and Cole were directed to sitting beside Leonard with a file folder so thick it had been rubber banded into sections was a woman Cole did not recognize. She was in her late 30s, sharp suit, natural hair, the particular stillness of someone who has been in many rooms exactly like this one and has long since stopped finding them uncomfortable. "Officer Cole." "Captain DeLuca, this is Detective Patricia Owens, Internal Affairs." Cole's stomach fell through the floor. Internal affairs meant this was not a conversation. A conversation was what you had when the chief wanted to make a point and let you keep your career. Internal affairs meant investigation. Investigation meant record. Record meant the thing in this room would outlast the room. Owens opened the file without looking at either of them slowly enough that Cole had time to see the tabs color-coded, labeled multiple sections, more documentation than he had imagined anyone had assembled, and she found the page she was looking for and set it flat on the desk in front of her without turning it toward him yet. "Officer Cole," she said in the even unhurried tone of someone with a great deal of material to cover and no reason to rush. "Are you familiar with the department's internal complaint review process?" "Yes, ma'am." "Are you aware of how many complaints have been filed against you during your time on the force?" DeLuca put his hand on Cole's arm. "A few," Cole said. "Standard for active street patrol." Owens looked at him for one quiet moment. 13, she said. She put the first page down in front of him like a card being dealt deliberate face-up, giving him the full, unhurried opportunity to look at it. And then she began to talk. Valerie Simmons, high school English teacher, 41 years old, stopped 18 months ago for a broken tail light. The tail light was not broken. She filed a complaint. The investigation found insufficient evidence to support her allegations. Case closed. Cole said nothing. DeLuca had told him to say nothing. Dana Okafor, dental hygienist, 38, stopped on a Tuesday afternoon and held for 50 minutes while a narcotics K9 unit was called. The dog found nothing. She missed her son's birthday dinner. She filed a complaint. Investigation found the officer had followed proper procedure. Case closed. Another page went down. Rosa Garza, doctoral candidate in molecular biology at Virginia Commonwealth University, stopped stone sober on a Thursday evening and required to recite the alphabet backwards, walk a straight line, touch her nose with her eyes closed. A full field sobriety protocol without a single observable indicator of impairment. Released without explanation, without apology, without any record of why she had been stopped in the first place. She did not file a complaint. She had not believed anyone would listen. In each of these cases, Owens said, turning pages with the same measured rhythm, "You provided an explanation." In each case, the explanation was sufficient to close the investigation. Probable cause, standard patrol procedure, officer discretion. She paused. 13 times. 13 women told the same story, and 13 times the system found a way to absorb it without producing a consequence. She finally looked directly at Cole. "That's not bad luck, that's architecture." DeLuca leaned forward. "Detective correlation isn't causation. Officer Cole operates in high-activity patrol areas where—" "I ran the traffic stop data," Owens said, not raising her voice, not changing her tone, simply continuing in the same register she had been using since the beginning, which was somehow worse than if she had gotten loud. Over an 8-month period, Officer Cole conducted 71 traffic stops. Would you like to know the demographics? She didn't wait for the answer. 89% involved Black or Latina women, 63 stops. Of those 63 stops, how many produced a citation or an arrest? Silence. 6. 6 citations. 57 stops where a woman was detained, questioned, sometimes searched and released with no ticket and no charge and no explanation. 57 stops that existed for no documented legal purpose. She set down a printed map, 3 neighborhoods circled and crosshatched, with small dots clustered so densely in those circles that the paper looked darker there. Midlothian Corridor, East Side, South Side. These 3 neighborhoods represent 8% of your assigned patrol zone. 94% of your stops happen here. She looked up. The violent crime rate in all 3 neighborhoods is below the city average. So the question I need you to answer is not whether this is a coincidence. The question is whether you want to provide an explanation now in this room or whether you'd prefer to provide it in a federal courtroom. Cole's jaw tightened. He gripped the armrests of his chair. DeLuca said, "My client is not going to answer hypothetical questions framed as—" "They're not hypothetical," Leonard said. It was the first time he had spoken since they sat down, and the quietness of it carried the full weight of his rank and the full weight of everything he had been watching build for 4 months. "They're documented. Let's talk about the gas station." Owens turned the laptop toward Cole and pressed play. The audio filled the office, Cole's own voice, unmistakably his, rendered in the clean, unambiguous fidelity of a dash cam microphone that had been recording from the moment the minivan's engine stopped. "Where'd you steal this car from Lo I Ngui Nhu Kek Ko Lun Josie Da?" The phrase hung in the air of Leonard's clean, precisely arranged office, like something that had been waiting a long time to be heard somewhere it couldn't be explained away. Cole watched himself on the screen, watched his own hands reach for the handcuffs, watched himself call in backup under a probable cause that did not exist. Owens closed the laptop. "On camera. Your body camera, which uploads automatically. The same camera you are required by department policy to activate during all civilian interactions." She paused. "Would you like to explain the phrase, 'people like you,' to me now, or shall we move on to summit towing?" Cole's face went the color of old ash. Owens opened the next section of the file with the careful, unhurried efficiency of someone who has been building toward this moment for weeks and is not going to rush it now that she's arrived. The financial records were laid out in a sequence that told a story so complete and so clean that even DeLuca across the table stopped making notes and simply sat reading his expression, moving through several stages of professional calculation before settling into something that looked for the first time like genuine concern, not for Cole, but for himself. 47 calls to summit towing in 3 years. 47 vehicles towed to Greg Tasker's lot, each one generating a base fee of $380 plus daily storage, each one a small transaction in a very long and very profitable pattern. And then the financial records subpoenaed that morning deposits from CTR Consulting, which was the name Greg Tasker had given his side company, $61,000 over 36 months, always within 2 weeks of a tow call, always in amounts just small enough to avoid certain reporting thresholds, because Greg was careful in the ways that people who have been doing something for a long time learn to be careful. $61,000, Owens said in the same flat factual tone she had used to deliver every number in the preceding 40 minutes. That's what we have documented. The audit is ongoing. The number sat on the table between them. DeLuca's hand, which had been on Cole's arm for most of the meeting in the supportive, communicative grip of a union representative managing a difficult situation, went very still. He had not known about the money. That much was visible on his face, and it changed the geometry of the room in a way that Cole felt immediately the particular cold of realizing that the person you brought with you as protection has just become a witness to your exposure. Cole's hands were shaking now, visible tremors in the fingers gripping the armrests of the chair, and he was not looking at anyone in the room, not Owens, not DeLuca, and certainly not Leonard, but at the space between his own shoes where the pattern of the carpet offered nothing resolved, nothing, and held no answer to any of the things that were happening to him. "Officer Cole," Leonard said, "you're on administrative leave effective this moment. Your badge, your service weapon, and your department vehicle keys." Cole reached up with his right hand toward the badge on his chest. His fingers found it pressed against it, and then something went wrong with the mechanism. Some failure of the small motor coordination that handles routine tasks, while the larger mind is occupied with catastrophe, and the badge came loose from its pin and fell straight down onto the surface of Leonard's desk with a sound that was much louder than its size should have produced. Cole reached for it. Owens's hand arrived first. She picked it up and set it without ceremony in front of Leonard. Cole stood. His legs had the uncertain quality of legs that have not fully committed to the project of holding a person upright, and he pushed back from the chair and moved toward the door with DeLuca behind him, and Leonard's voice stopped them both before they reached it. 13 complaints, Leonard said. He was not looking at Cole's back. He was looking at the badge on his desk. 13 women who told the same story. 13 times the process found a way to conclude that there wasn't quite enough to act on. He was quiet for a moment, and the quiet had texture. Diane was number 14. The only difference between her and every woman who came before her is that someone with the authority to act was sitting in the back seat. He looked up. That's not how a system is supposed to work, and it's not going to be how this one works anymore. Cole walked out without turning around. DeLuca followed him and did not say a word. Frank DeLuca held his press conference on the steps of City Hall 48 hours after the gas station, and he was very good at it. Measured, voice dress, uniform medals, arranged with the care of a man who understands the grammar of optics and has been speaking that language for nearly 3 decades. Officer Russell Cole DeLuca, told the assembled cameras, was a decorated 15-year veteran of the Richmond Police Department who had served his community with consistent dedication and had received multiple commendations for outstanding patrol work. What he was not, DeLuca said, and here his voice acquired a particular calibrated gravity, was a man who should have his career ended because of a single interaction involving the chief's own family. He used the word family carefully, the way you use a word when you want it to do a specific job without being visible doing it. The implication was gentle and surgical. How can we trust an investigation where the investigator's wife is the complainant? It reframed everything, turned misconduct into a marital dispute, turned documented patterns into personal grievance, turned 13 complaints into one inconvenient Saturday. By that evening, 3 Richmond media outlets were running the same angle. Chief's wife. Incident raises ethics questions. Police union challenges. Impartiality of internal review. Not one of them mentioned the 13 prior complaints. Not one mentioned the body camera footage. Not one mentioned $61,000 and a towing company with a very convenient family structure. That night, someone painted a single word on the side of Leonard's personal car in red paint in the driveway of their home, Rat. Leonard filed a report. He didn't expect resolution. The officer who responded was professional and correct, and had eyes that communicated without any ambiguity that he understood exactly what had happened and why, and that understanding sat in the space between them like a third person in the room. Her supervisor called on Monday morning with a voice carefully engineered to project genuine concern, that particular vocal texture of institutional self-protection dressed in the language of care, and said that perhaps given the current climate, it might be worth considering some personal time while things settled down, because the firm was a professional environment and wasn't really positioned to appear to be taking sides in what had become, he was careful to say, a political situation. A political situation. Diane said she would think about it. She wouldn't. The texts were easier to handle than the calls you could delete a text without listening to a person's voice while they explained to you why your experience was actually a complicated issue with multiple sides. She blocked 6 numbers before noon and stopped counting after that. The email came from a woman named Valerie Simmons at 11:47 on Monday morning, and it had the subject line, "I saw your name in the news," and the quiet, careful tone of someone who had been carrying something for a long time and had finally identified a place it might be safe to set it down. Valerie was the first complaint. Stopped for a broken tail light that wasn't broken, investigation closed for insufficient evidence. Her daughter had been 17 years old and sitting in the passenger seat, and she had watched Cole go through the car while Valerie stood on the sidewalk, and she had cried the whole way home, and she had had trouble sleeping for 2 weeks afterward, and Valerie had filed the complaint and received the letter and had spent 1.5 years trying to find the words to explain to a 17-year-old why the process existed if it didn't work. She had kept everything, every document, every date, every detail written in a spiral notebook she had bought specifically for the purpose of remembering, because she had known in the particular bone-deep way that people know things they can't prove, that someday the record would matter. "If you're fighting this," she wrote, "I want to help." He thought I'd forget. I didn't. Diane read the email 3 times, forwarded it to Owens and typed back, "Thank you. You're not alone. And neither am I." By the end of the week, 19 more women had written. Imani had nightmares for 3 nights in a row after the gas station, not vague anxiety dreams, but specific ones, the kind where the scene is clear and the threat is clear, and the thing that is most frightening is the helplessness in each dream. She watched her mother being led away and could not do anything, could not move, could not make a sound that anyone could hear. Diane sat with her each time until she fell back asleep, and then went downstairs and sat at the kitchen table in the dark, not reading, not thinking in any structured way, just sitting in the specific silence of a parent who has brought something difficult into her child's life for a reason she knows is right, and is finding the knowing insufficient comfort at 2 in the morning. The thing that happened at school on Wednesday was delivered to Diane by Imani after dinner in the particular way that children deliver hard news sideways, not looking up, finding a reason to be busy with something else while the words come out. A boy named Tyler Morrison, whose father worked at the department, had told Imani across a lunch table loud enough for 3 other tables to hear that his dad said her mom was a liar, that she had gotten a good officer fired because she didn't like cops, that her whole family were traitors. Imani had not responded. She hadn't known what to say. She came home and was quiet all afternoon, and after dinner she asked Diane the question that Diane had been both expecting and dreading, "Mommy, do you hate the police?" Diane explained the difference, the careful, important difference between an action and a category, between holding one person accountable and condemning an entire institution, and Imani listened with the serious, uncertain attention of a 9-year-old trying to build a new cognitive framework in real time, and at the end of the explanation she whispered, "I wish you didn't say anything. Then everything would be normal." Diane went to her room and closed the door and cried. Not the small, controlled kind of crying that you can manage around other people, but the full and emptying kind that happens when you have been holding yourself together for long enough and the holding finally becomes more than you can do without putting it down. Her phone lit up on the nightstand. Leonard's name. "You okay?" She looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she picked up the phone and typed back, "No, but I'm not stopping." Diane sent the email to Nicole Ferris at the Richmond Times on a Wednesday evening from her kitchen table while Leonard was upstairs and Amani was finally asleep, and she pressed send before she could engage in the lengthy internal negotiation that she knew from past experience would result in a draft sitting unsent in her outbox until she had refined it into something safer and therefore smaller. The subject line was, "I want to tell my story." The interview ran on Friday front page above the fold. Diane's words were in it, unfiltered, and exactly as she had spoken them because Nicole Ferris was the kind of journalist who understood that the most powerful thing you can do with a person's account is get out of the way of it. The piece was long. It covered the gas station, yes, but it also covered the 13 complaints, the way each one had been processed, and closed the particular bureaucratic architecture of a system that produces the same outcome 13 consecutive times, and describes each instance as an isolated assessment rather than evidence of anything. The line that traveled 13 women came before me. The system said insufficient evidence 13 times. I'm number 14. The only difference between me and every woman who didn't get this outcome is that my husband had power. That is not justice. That is luck. Within 48 hours, 28 more women contacted the Richmond Times. Sandra Moore created a Change.org petition that reached 4,200 signatures in 5 days. Claire Jameson issued a public statement offering pro bono legal representation for civil rights claims from any of the women involved. A community meeting at Beth Elam Church attracted 160 people, standing room only, cameras in the back, and 17 women stood up in public for the first time to say what had happened to them. Not just with Cole, but across the department, across years, across the accumulated weight of stops that felt wrong and searches that went nowhere, and the exhausting daily mathematics of deciding whether reporting it would cost you more than absorbing it. The story had stopped being about the chief's wife on a Saturday afternoon. It had become something larger and older and much harder to contain. The email arrived in Patricia Owen's inbox at 7:43 in the morning, 4 days before the city council hearing, from an address she didn't immediately recognize, and then she read the sender's name and her coffee went cold in her hand before she finished the first paragraph. Kevin Nash, the backup officer from the gas station, the 29-year-old who had stood in that parking lot and made one small, insufficient decision and then gone home and apparently not slept well about it for 4 days. She forwarded it to Leonard without reading past the first page. She called him 30 seconds later. "We need to meet," she said, "not at the station." They met at a diner on the outer edge of the city, a place with 2 trucks in the lot and a waitress who had been on her feet for 6 hours and had no particular interest in who her customers were or what they were looking at on a laptop screen. Nash had sent the attachment with 3 lines of explanation. He had been carrying it for 14 months. He had told himself it was not his business. He had watched through a car window as a 9-year-old girl pressed her face to the glass and cried, and he had decided the following Tuesday morning that some things could not be classified as not his business. Owens opened the attachment and turned the laptop toward Leonard. It was an internal department memo. 3 pages formatted on Richmond PD letterhead, authored and signed by Captain Frank DeLuca. The same Frank DeLuca who had been standing in front of the City Hall cameras 2 days ago in his dress uniform defending Russell Cole as a dedicated public servant whose career was being sacrificed on the altar of personal politics. The subject line read, "Q2 Performance Metrics Towing Contract Compliance." The body of the memo was 5 paragraphs and did not bother with indirection. Summit Towing. DeLuca had written required a minimum of 50 vehicles per month to maintain the financial viability of its city contract. Current departmental numbers were running at 31. This was the memo noted a performance shortfall that reflected poorly on the officers responsible for maintaining enforcement activity in the relevant zones. The relevant zones were identified by name: Midlothian Corridor, East Side, South Side. They were described in language that Owens read aloud at the diner table, with the flat, careful precision she brought to everything, as areas characterized by high vehicle asset value and low likelihood of organized legal pushback from residents. Minimum expectations: 7 traffic stops per week, 2 tow referrals per month. Failure to meet benchmarks would be reflected in performance evaluations. Leonard read it twice. He set it down on the table. He looked at the window of the diner at the parking lot outside at nothing in particular. "This isn't a rogue officer," he said. "This is designed. This was built by someone who wanted it to work this way." Owens nodded. "It gets worse," she said, and opened the next file. The forensic extraction from Cole's department-issued phone had produced several hundred text messages organized by Owens's team into a sequence that told with the relentless clarity of documentation the complete story of how the operation had actually functioned at the street level. Cole to Officer Martinez. 14 months ago, DeLuca wants 14 stops this week. Midlothian is easy. Soccer moms don't lawyer up. Cole to an unidentified number a date that matched complaint number 8 to within 3 days. She filed. Don't sweat it. Union handles it. Multiple messages containing language about the women being stopped that Owens did not read aloud in the diner, but that she had read alone in her office at 6 in the morning, and that had settled in her chest with the particular permanent weight of things that cannot be unknowed. The city's financial audit of Summit Towing's contract, $740,000, paid to the city over 3 years in contract fees, which created a legitimate paper relationship between the towing company and municipal government that made the money flowing in the other direction. The $61,000 to Cole, the $94,000, combined to 3 other officers, looked to a casual examination like unrelated transactions between unrelated parties. And DeLuca clean. Completely clean in every account with his name on it. Owens laid out the last piece. His brother owned the storage facility that Summit Towing contracted for vehicle holding. The rental payments, $130,000 over 3 years paid by Summit Towing to DeLuca's Brothers LLC, existed nowhere in any document connected to Frank DeLuca's name. Everyone profited, Owens said, except the women who got stopped. Leonard looked at the table. The full shape of it was visible now. DeLuca creating pressure officers making stops, taskers' trucks arriving money, moving through family connections with just enough distance to require effort to trace. A machine built incrementally over years that had processed dozens of women through a side effect of its operation without ever needing to intend them specifically as targets. They were simply the material the machine ran on. The FBI field office in Richmond received Owens's referral that afternoon. They responded within 4 hours, which Owens noted was unusually fast and indicated they had been watching something in this direction for longer than she'd known. The Washington Post story ran at noon the following day. Virginia Police Department accused of quota-based towing scheme targeting minority neighborhoods. By 3 in the afternoon, the ACLU had issued a statement. By 5, the Department of Justice announced a preliminary civil rights inquiry. By 7, Frank DeLuca resigned as union president through his attorney, who issued a statement describing his client's involvement as administrative oversight conducted without criminal intent and affirming his full cooperation with any ongoing investigation. 3 sentences that contained no acknowledgement of the 37 women, no apology in any direction, and the very specific energy of a man who has decided that the most important thing now is to be visibly cooperative before anyone can describe him as resistant. Cole's attorney called Owens that same evening. The message was brief. His client wished to discuss the possibility of cooperation in exchange for consideration on the charges. Cole would testify against DeLuca. Cole would provide whatever the federal investigation needed. Cole would do what people do when they have run out of every other option and have finally arrived at the basic arithmetic of self-preservation. The hearing was 4 days away, and the evidence was no longer a question of sufficiency. The only remaining question was what the system was going to do with it. The lobby outside the Richmond City Council chambers at 7 in the evening was not a comfortable place to wait, but Valerie Simmons, Dana Okafor, and Rosa Garza had arrived 30 minutes early anyway, and they stood near the water fountain in the corridor with the slightly formal, carefully composed posture of people who have dressed deliberately for an occasion and are managing the gap between the formality of their clothes and the chaos of their feelings. They had spoken on the phone. They had exchanged emails through Nicole Ferris's introduction, but they had not until this evening stood in the same physical space and looked at each other's faces. And there was a moment, brief, wordless, carried entirely in the recognition that passed between them, where the thing they had each been carrying alone for months became briefly visible as the shared weight it had always been. None of them said anything. The moment didn't require it. Inside the chamber, 60 people filled every seat with more standing along the walls. 7 camera operators had claimed positions near the back. All 9 council members were present, which was not typical for a Thursday evening session. Council member Lisa Hartwell gavelled the room to order at 7:02, and the sound of it echoed in a space that felt considerably heavier than its dimensions should have allowed. Leonard wore his dress uniform, not the casual authority of the man in gym shorts who had stepped out of a minivan on a Saturday afternoon, but the full formal weight of the chief of police of the city of Richmond, every detail precise, every element of the presentation communicating that what was happening in this room was official, documented, and permanent. His testimony was clinical and exact. The gas station stop broken down procedure by procedure, each deviation from protocol identified and named, no editorializing, no personal language, no reference to the fact that the woman being detained was his wife, except as a matter of material relevance to his decision to record the interaction rather than intervene immediately. He presented it the way Diane presented financial data, as a structure with the clarity of someone who wants the numbers to speak and understands that numbers speak most powerfully when you don't raise your voice over them. He finished the procedural breakdown and paused. "This is not a single incident with an unfortunate outcome," he said. "What Detective Owens and I have documented is a pattern that operated continuously for 6 years, involved at minimum 4 officers, and 1 senior administrator, generated a documented financial benefit of over $200,000 through family connections, and processed 13 complaints through a review system that produced the same result each time: insufficient evidence." He looked at the council members. "The women who came before my wife were not wrong about what had happened to them. The system that reviewed their complaints was not incapable of finding what they described. It was not designed to find it." Detective Owens projected the memo on a screen visible to the entire chamber and read it aloud in its entirety, including the phrase, "low likelihood of organized legal pushback from residents." The room was very quiet. Diane walked to the podium with her hands at her sides and her chin level, and she stood there for a moment before she began, not for effect, but because she was making a decision about how to start, and she wanted to get it right. "I'm an accountant," she said. "I work with data every day. I know how to read a pattern, and the data in this case is very clear about why I was stopped on Saturday afternoon." She paused. "But the data doesn't capture the sound my daughter made when she saw a man reach for handcuffs while I was standing in a parking lot with my hands in the air. The data doesn't measure what it costs a 9-year-old to learn on an ordinary Saturday afternoon that doing everything right doesn't mean you're safe." She looked at each council member in turn, taking her time, not a performance but a genuine requirement that each person in this room understand that she was talking to them specifically, not to a body, not to an institution, but to 9 individual human beings who were going to make a decision tonight that would affect what happened to the next woman who stood in a parking lot with her hands raised. 13 women came before me," she said. "They told the truth. They followed the process. They waited. And 13 times they were told insufficient evidence. I'm number 14. The difference between my outcome and theirs is not the quality of my complaint. It is not the credibility of my account. The difference is that my husband happened to be in the back seat. Her voice hardened in a way that was controlled and entirely intentional. "That is not how justice is supposed to work. That is luck. And we cannot build a system on the assumption that the 14th woman will always be lucky." She let that settle. "Fire Officer Cole if you want, but if you don't change the structure that protected him in 2 years, I will be back in this room with 28 other women, and we will do this again." The applause started at the back of the room. Hartwell gavelled it down without impatience. Valerie Simmons stood at the podium with the composed, deliberate bearing of a woman who has spent 20 years teaching young people how to carry themselves in rooms that don't expect them to have something worth saying. "I teach my students to respect authority," she said, "every year. That's part of my job, helping young people understand that institutions exist to serve them, that the people who hold power within those institutions are there to protect them. I have been teaching that for 20 years. She paused. "I don't know what I've been teaching them toward." Dana Okafor was next, she was brief. "My son turned 9 on the day Officer Cole held me on a curb for 50 minutes because a dog couldn't find what he told dispatch he could smell. I missed dinner. I missed cake. I missed 9 years old." She looked at the counsel. "That was in a complaint file for 1.5 years. The file said insufficient evidence." Rosa Garza stood very straight. "I am completing a doctoral program in molecular biology. Officer Cole asked me to recite the alphabet backwards, walk a straight line, and touch my nose with my eyes closed on a Thursday evening when I had consumed nothing except coffee and dinner. He did not tell me why. He did not give me a citation. He let me go and drove away." She let the silence hold for a moment. "I didn't file a complaint. I didn't believe anyone would listen. I want the record to reflect that calculation, the calculation that telling the truth to the system would produce no result worth the cost of telling it, was based on 13 prior outcomes entirely rational." Cole's attorney read a prepared statement on his behalf. Cole himself was not present. The statement expressed regret for any perception of impropriety, acknowledged 15 years of service, and asked the counsel to weigh his full record in reaching their determination. It was 4 sentences long and contained no acknowledgement of the $61,000 or the memo or the text messages about soccer moms not lawyering up. "His full record," Hartwell said when the attorney finished, "includes 13 complaints, $61,000 in documented kickbacks and text messages in which he described the women he was targeting as easy. Is there a portion of that record you'd like the counsel to specifically consider?" The attorney declined to respond. Council member Miller tried once. He was measured about it, choosing his words carefully. He understood the optics of the room and was not interested in becoming a symbol of the wrong thing. "We have to be careful," he said, "about the precedent of terminating a 15-year career based on 13 complaints, 71 documented stops, a signed memo establishing financial quotas, forensic phone evidence, body camera footage, and testimony from 28 affected citizens." Hartwell said, not unkindly, but with the precision of someone closing a door that has been left open too long. 13 years of service is a real thing. So is 13 complaints. At some point, the council has to decide which number means more. Miller was quiet. The votes came in sequence. Termination of Officer Russell Cole's employment, 7 in favor, 2 opposed. Suspension of Captain Frank DeLuca, pending the outcome of the federal investigation, 9 in favor, unanimous, which produced a sound in the gallery that was not quite applause and not quite an exhale, but something between the two. The policy reforms mandatory body cameras footage made publicly accessible within 72 hours. Prohibition of any numerical performance metrics tied to stops or tows, establishment of a civilian oversight board with independent subpoena authority, passed 8-1. Hartwell brought the gavel down with the finality of something that has been a long time coming and has finally arrived. Officer Russell Cole, your employment with the Richmond Police Department is terminated effective immediately. this council adopts Ordinance 2024-118 into the municipal code. Diane did not smile. She sat in her chair and closed her eyes for exactly one breath, a single, quiet, private moment in a room full of cameras. And then she opened them and looked at the front of the room with the expression of someone who has finished a very long climb and is not yet ready to decide how she feels about the view. Cole sat in his personal vehicle in the City Hall parking lot for the full duration of the hearing, listening to the live radio coverage through a single earbud, and when the vote came through and Hartwell's gavel struck and the coverage shifted to interviews with community members and attorneys, and the chief's composed, measured statement at the microphone, he reached over and turned the radio off in the middle of a sentence and sat in the silence. The parking lot had mostly emptied out. A few cars remained near the back. The overhead lights cast their orange-yellow glow across the asphalt, and somewhere on the other side of the building there were voices, people filing out the particular energy of a crowd that has watched something significant happen and is still processing what it means. He could hear them, but not make out the words. He looked down at his shirt, at the place on his chest where the badge had been for 15 years, where the pinhole was still visible in the fabric, a small dark circle against the blue of his uniform shirt that would not wash out, that would remain there in the weave of the cloth as evidence of the thing that had been there and was not there now. His phone showed 4 missed calls from officers he had worked alongside for years. He did not return them. A text from Greg Tasker read simply, "Don't contact me. Lawyer's orders." He read it twice, then put the phone face down on the passenger seat and looked out the windshield at the empty space in front of his car. The thing about having operated for a long time as a man who believed he was untouchable was that you built no architecture for this. No framework, no contingency, no practiced way of sitting in a parking lot at 9:15 in the evening with a pinhole in your shirt and $61,000 that now had a very different meaning than it had carried this time last week. He stayed in the parking lot for 23 minutes, which he knew because he watched the clock on the dashboard and did not stop watching it, partly because looking at the clock meant not having to look at anything else. At some point, his mind went back to Saturday, to the gas station, the afternoon heat, the sound the asphalt made under his boots as he approached a silver minivan, that particular confidence so automatic it had ceased to feel like a choice, that he was the one who decided what happened next in any space he entered. He tried to locate that feeling now and found that it was simply gone, not suppressed or wounded, but absent in the structural way that things are absent when the conditions that produced them have been removed. He thought about the girl in the back seat. 9 years old, face pressed to the window. The sound of her crying that he had registered at the time as background noise, as inconvenient atmosphere, as the unavoidable emotional weather of people who don't understand how things work. He sat with that memory in the parking lot until it became uncomfortable, and then he kept sitting with it because there was nowhere to go. The clock moved. The voices on the other side of the building faded. The parking lot lights hummed their flat, indifferent hum. He started the engine eventually, not because he had decided where to go, but because sitting still had become indistinguishable from waiting for something, and there was nothing left to wait for. The car moved out of the space and into the empty street, and the City Hall parking lot closed behind him, and whatever came next would come in a different location, under different conditions. Without the badge, without the cruiser, without any of the things that had for 15 years allowed Russell Cole to believe that the world organized itself around his comfort. The Summit BP station on Midlothian Turnpike looked the same in October as it had in July. Same intersection, same overhead canopy, same machines, cycling through the familiar arithmetic of fuel dispensed and dollars accumulated. The leaves on the trees at the edge of the lot had started to turn, which was the only visible evidence that time had passed, and it had passed, and things within it had changed in ways that the station itself gave no indication of registering. Diane pulled up to the same pump on a Saturday afternoon, Imani in the passenger seat, now old enough to ride up front, which had happened somewhere in the week since July, and which Diane was still adjusting to, in the way parents adjust to the incremental passages of childhood with a mixture of pride and the faint persistent ache of something going by. A patrol car turned into the lot as Diane was replacing the fuel cap. A different Officer Young, who drove in with the unremarkable professionalism of someone who has somewhere to be and is simply passing through this space on the way there. He glanced over, raised a hand in the small neutral wave that people exchange in shared public spaces, and continued to the exit. Imani watched him go. "Was that okay?" she asked. "That was fine, baby," Diane said. "That was just someone doing their job." Imani was quiet for a moment, processing. "Is it safe now?" Diane looked at the machine at the receipt printing out at the ordinary afternoon light falling on an ordinary intersection. She thought about Valerie Simmons and Dana Okafor and Rosa Garza, about the 25 other women who had written emails and shown up at City Hall and stood in a church basement and said for the first time in many cases to an audience that finally had to listen that something had happened to them that should not have happened. She thought about what it had cost each of them to do it and what it had cost her and what it was worth. "Safer," she said. "We made it safer, but we have to keep watching baby. That part doesn't stop." Imani nodded with the solemn 9-year-old gravity of someone filing information for future reference and buckled her seatbelt. Cole was terminated and faced criminal charges on 4 counts of plea negotiation that had begun the night of the council vote, ground through the following months, with the slow, unglamorous mechanics of the legal process producing no dramatic conclusion before the year ended and several uncomfortable ones after it. DeLuca resigned his pension under federal pressure and hired 3 attorneys, which was generally understood in legal circles as an indicator of a man who has looked at the evidence against him and made certain calculations. Summit Towing lost its city contract within 2 weeks of the Washington Post story, and Greg Tasker faced civil suits from 23 women, which Claire Jameson's pro bono coalition coordinated with the particular organized patience of people who have been waiting a long time to have this conversation in the right room. Kevin Nash was reassigned following his cooperation with the investigation, which was not comfortable and was not without professional cost, but which he later described in a brief conversation with Leonard in a department hallway as the first thing he had done in 6 years that did not require him to avoid thinking about it. Officer after officer reviewed the new body camera requirements under Ordinance 2024-118 and made their own individual calculations about what the cameras meant for how they did their jobs. And most of those calculations Leonard believed landed in roughly the right place, not from moral transformation, but from the straightforward recognition that the footage uploaded automatically and the clock said 72 hours and someone was going to watch it. The 28 women met in person for the first time at Beth Elam Church on a Tuesday evening in November. Not a rally, not a press conference, just a room where people who had shared an experience could finally share it out loud together and be understood without explanation. No one celebrated, but something in the room felt, if not resolved, then at least acknowledged, which is its own form of relief, the particular relief of having been seen. Diane thought about her father sometimes in the months that followed, a man who had died 10 years ago and who had said things to her throughout her childhood that she had understood at the time as fatherly instruction, and now understood as something closer to prophecy, the accumulated wisdom of a person who had lived long enough to know which things were always true. When someone's wrong, you speak up. He had told her once when she was 12, even if your voice shakes, even if you're scared, because silence isn't neutral. Silence is a choice, and it's the wrong one. She had been scared. Her voice had not shaken in any way that anyone else could hear, but it had shaken in the way that things shake when you are keeping them very steady by an act of sustained will. And she had kept speaking through the parking lot and the office and the council chamber and the phone calls and the emails and the nights at the kitchen table while Imani slept upstairs and Leonard sat next to her, and neither of them had anything left to say that would make it smaller than it was. On the October Saturday, pulling out of the Summit BP on Midlothian Turnpike with Imani in the passenger seat and the receipt folded in the cup holder, and nothing extraordinary happening in any visible direction. Diane Carter understood something that she did not try to translate into a sentence because it wasn't the kind of thing that survived translation, that the ordinary Saturday afternoon she was currently living, unremarkable, safe, hers, was the thing she had been fighting for. Not a verdict or a vote or a front-page headline. Just this: a pump, a receipt, a patrol car that waves and keeps going, a daughter who asks if it's safe and receives an honest answer. It was a small thing. It was also everything. And if this story meant something to you, if you saw yourself in Diane and Valerie, in the 13 women who came before, and the 9-year-old who pressed her face to the glass, then share it. Not for the numbers, but because the only reason any of this changed is that people refuse to look away. Subscribe to our channel and don't look away.